2019, I raised $1.5 million of venture capital, and we were one of 3 businesses in the functional medicine space that had ever raised venture capital. Hadn't happened before that. That was 6 years ago. Now we have companies raising $250 million in a single round. This has become a very attractive space, and for good reason, right? Practitioners are doing incredible work. We're seeing chronic disease reversal. Patients are getting healthier because of this.
I mean, what a time to be alive for, people in our industry. When I first got started in the industry, if you went outside of the standard of care, you could lose your license. In 2005, that was what the industry was like. You would be on Quackwatch blog. Now here we have a situation where you now have support in the government for researching what is driving chronic illness and, focus on health and move pharma out of the driving seat.
Welcome to another episode of Freedom RX. I'm your host, Seth Conger. And if you're in the world of functional medicine right now, you're probably feeling it. The tension, the shifts, the opportunity, the uncertainty from consumer tech moving into the wellness space and the rise of massive provider networks like Maha to the economic headwinds making patients more cautious of how they spend. The landscape is evolving fast. So how should practitioners navigate it? Today, I'm flipping the mic to our executive producer, James Maskell, a leader who spent the last decade building platforms, launching communities, writing books, and pushing for more collaborative, scalable versions of integrative and functional medicine. In this episode, James breaks down what's happening in the landscape right now, from the market disruptors, the economic shifts, to the emerging models that could define the next chapter of this movement. So if you're trying to make sense of it all and figure out exactly what it means to your practice, you won't want to miss this conversation. So let's get into it. James, welcome to Freedom RX.
Great to be here. Thanks, Seth.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the build it and they will come trap in functional and integrative medicine, right? Early on, so many practices thrived by just opening their doors. But in today's environment, it's much more challenging. Let's dive into that for a minute.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. 11 years ago, when we started the Functional Forum, there's all this pent up demand for functional medicine, right? Because you have so many books, you have the sort of Mark Hyman effect. He's out there talking about functional medicine, and there's podcasts and there's books and there's all of these new ways to get the word out about functional medicine. So I think there's just a lot of pent up demand. And you can see that by the number of people who are going to the IFM database and looking for a practitioner. Even back in 2015, 16, it was over 1 million people. And so if you started a functional medicine practice and you hung your shingle, chances are people would come because the consumer demand was much higher than the practice supply. And that worked pretty well in the beginning. You just had to be there at the right time in the right place and be the first to market in your zip code. And you would have patients coming in just by that nature. But this is not 2014. This is 2025. And, you have a lot more options now as a consumer. You have the functional medicine practitioner in your community, but you also have 5 or 6 others, all with maybe different specialties, all with different levels of experience, different training, different backgrounds. And then you also have a huge rise in the number of other things that look like functional medicine that are competing for the attention and wallet share of your patients. There's a huge shift with COVID towards telemedicine. So now, you're not just in competition with other practitioners in your area, but potentially you are in competition with all kinds of services across state lines, things that aren't actually functional medicine, but look a lot like it and are marketed the same. So, you really have to think differently about how to build the practice. And so what we're seeing now is just that in order to be successful, you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about what you're doing. And that means having a plan. It means executing on a plan. It probably means, using media, social media and modern media to get the word out to people in your area and to really operate like every other business operates in the world, to actually be in the business of functional medicine and start to act like it.
James, do you think it's still possible just to hang your shingle and build a business off of that?
I think it's still possible. I just don't think it's the percentage move. It might work and it might not. Ultimately, there are still niches where that could definitely work. Like in pediatrics today, I think if you could just hang a shingle and do it, because there's still so much pent up demand in pediatrics, but there's still so little supply. And so, if you're a pediatrician and you're willing to say, hey, I think some of the standard of care that we've been delivering might be driving the level of chronic illness that we're seeing. And you have this huge, while there's an economic shift in one direction, people are definitely willing to invest in their kids. People are definitely willing to, there's a movement to really understand where chronic pediatric illness is coming from. And so I think in the niches, there's still incredible opportunities. I mean, look at brain health as well. Like in no other form of medicine can you reverse cognitive decline. But as you know better than almost anyone, it is possible with functional medicine to reverse cognitive decline. So in those two areas, there's almost, if you can hang your shingle and you can get good outcomes, you can be full. Same with holistic dentistry, right? There are certain niches where I think you can still do it, but I think the sort of functional medicine as the calling card for definite practice success, I think that era is over.
Yeah. So, James, you mentioned you've been at this for quite some time. You've written two of the seminal books in this entire industry, The Evolution of Medicine and The Community Cure. We've known each other for quite some time based on a friendship. We've worked together in multiple different segments, and I've always known you as someone who can see around corners, right? So much of what you've worked on has almost been ahead of the curve in this industry. And I think you have kind of a map in your head, right? You kind of understand how these things work, and you have an ability to predict the future a little bit, right? So for practitioners and consumers, right, on the consumer side, we've got wearables coming out. We have biohacking tools. We've got lab tests going directly to consumers. There's virtual health subscriptions. Tech is going straight to the patient now. But it feels somewhat like practitioners may be still using a paper map. They're not using a GPS system anymore. So how should providers be thinking about making that shift to get up to speed with what consumers are now demanding, right? Are we being disrupted? Or are we actually being handed a megaphone here in this industry?
I think short-term megaphone, long-term disruption. And I don't know how long that long-term is. I think that, as I said, there's a lot more choices that a consumer can make if they want to be in the business of chronic disease reversal. The topic of chronic disease reversal was not really talked about until a few years ago. And now you hear it sort of everywhere, because whether you're talking about prescriptions for things that create health, or whether you're talking about lab testing and direct-to-consumer delivery, everyone's talking in that language because that's what people want. They have a chronic disease. The vast majority of Americans do have a chronic disease, and they want to not have a chronic disease. And ultimately, so that's where the game is being played. I think consumers have expectations that if they're going to pay for a physician, and they're going to pay, ultimately when you're marketing yourself as a functional medicine doctor, you're essentially saying, I'm going to give you something that's not available in the standard of care if you pay more for me. And that's the vast majority of functional medicine is done on cash for all the reasons that we know, whether that be cash fee for service, or, we're seeing a growing trend towards a multi-tier membership model. Programs have been, more and more have been popular over time. But I think most practitioners in functional medicine realizing they need to connect the service, the promise with the business model. So if the promise is a higher level of care that you can expect to enjoy ongoing, then that membership makes more sense. If you're delivering a specific service like reversing a chronic illness, then a program might make more sense. But I think I think practitioners are in a position where they're now having to meet the expectations of the patient who have a wearable. When it was 7 years ago, when I went on tour and we had Oura Ring as a sponsor. And now you can see it's a multi-billion-dollar company. They have their own, journey that they're looking to take their users on. They want to own that customer. And I think the thing that I would just say to everyone is that if you look at these big consumer trends, so Oura Ring might be one example, Function Health might be another example, Fountain Life, all of these groups that are taking in significant amount of venture capital, they all want to own the customer. And that means that they're expecting that they are going to own you or own the customer in the medium term. And so ultimately, what you need to do as a practitioner is put yourself in a position where you have the core relationship, where you have the trust, and you may choose to use these tools in your practice for now, but just to know that every one of those organizations intends to own the customer and to sort of control the way that you navigate through healthcare. And therefore, it's really more critical than ever to build that human relationship in a way that those brands can't.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, in 2019, I raised $1.5 million of venture capital, and we were one of 3 businesses that had in the functional medicine space that had ever raised venture capital. Hadn't happened before that. That was 6 years ago, right? Now we have companies raising $250 million in a single round inside of the functional medicine space. So this has become a very attractive space, and for good reason, right? Practitioners are doing incredible work. We're seeing chronic disease reversal. Patients are getting healthier because of this. And I love the fact that there is money being poured into this industry right now because it's just going to help more people at the end of the day, right? At the same time, it's not just consumer tech or venture capital that's interested in this. We also actually have the government for the first time ever, right? So Maha is playing a role in this movement, and they have not, as far as I know, directly associated, functional medicine or integrative medicine, but they're taking a broad approach to say there's a huge, huge problem in our entire country. And that is the health of our nation. And that has the chance to bankrupt us, and we got to do something about it. So I feel like it's a gut check, right? For the entire nation. I feel like it's a gut check for industry, the gut check for the government. Is Maha becoming the nervous system of functional medicine, or do you think they're going to be playing a different role?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, what a time to be alive for, people in our industry. And I think that for everyone who's been here, like when I first got started in the industry, if you went outside of the standard of care, you could lose your license, right? That was just the sort of in 2005, that was what the industry was like. And that's what you would hear. And you would be on Quack Watch blog, if you're doing anything. Like now here we have a situation where it's sort of 180 degrees different, where you now have support in the government for researching what is driving chronic illness, for understanding the environmental causes of chronic illness, and, aggressively looking to focus on health and move pharma out of the driving seat. I mean, you're seeing that in the news all the time. Now, I was at a conference recently, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, and one of the keynotes at that conference was Del Bigtree, who was acting as the he was the head of communication for the RFK campaign, and now is sort of involved in the Make America Healthy Again organization. And ultimately, if you look at their website and you see what they're trying to do, it's pretty much involved around functional medicine. I mean, they know because they've experienced it. I mean, Dell, having made that movie in 2016, has been inundated with parents saying, hey, my kid has this issue. Where do I go? And the obvious answer is that you go to a functional medicine doctor. And so, one of their core things that they want to do is to establish a network of clinicians that use lifestyle in front of medication. And ultimately, there's a lot of people who would fit that bill. There's the whole lifestyle medicine movement, right? You've got that movement, which has been very effective at getting into hospitals, but you don't see quite as many, individual practices in that way. Like, you have that. Then you have the functional medicine movement. You have the integrative medicine movement. You have the whole health movement making its way into the VA and so forth, whole person health. And, you have regenerative medicine, and now you have longevity, which is sort of a little bit of all of those things in one. And so one of the things that because I've been in some of those conversations, there is a real interest in any of those organizations to, be part of that, because it's coming from the government. It's not just, some other effort. There is a desire to sort of get involved and have their practitioners, be part of that community. And I think, I did a podcast last year where we talked about the nervous system, and particularly the vagus nerve, being the organ of unity, because it was really working to create unity in the body and to connect the body and have it work together. And in that way, I think you could argue that if it hits its potential in the next 2 years and 4 years, and we come out on the other side of this with a nationwide network of clinicians and clinics and organizations that are in the business of reversing chronic illness, and that is documented, and those outcomes are created, and there is, government efforts pushing people towards those type of practitioners and paying for those kind of services. That sounds like the nervous system of functional medicine to me. And, I'm excited to be sort of in those conversations and, seeing the direction that it's going.
So it sounds to me like there are some competing things here, right? And we can get real worried about companies that go direct to consumer that have a lot of VC funding behind them. And we can spin ourselves up thinking about that of, oh my gosh, they're going to take my patients. Or we can think about the fact that the government is now supporting a functional approach to health, whatever you want to call it, whole person health or functional or integrative or holistic. And it sounds like we're potentially going to be back into another 2014 situation where there's a whole lot more demand than there is supply, right? But I feel like at the same time, the supply needs to be a little bit more stable, right? It can't just be someone hanging out a shingle with no processes and no tools and no stable backbone. I feel like the practices that are going to be able to really profit in a lot of different ways, right? Profit from seeing more patients, get better outcomes, profit from the dollars that they get to take, profit in the time allocation that they get to have choice around in their business. It's going to happen from having an operating system in their business. And right now we talked about there's a lot of tools, right? There's Aura rings, and there's really, really fancy labs, and there's even some software on the back end. But the businesses that don't have an operating system, I feel, may miss the opportunity to fully catch this wave. How do you think about that?
I mean, I agree. I think that it's a call to up level, right? I think that it's a call to practitioners to really think clearly about the role they want to play. Ultimately, the exciting thing is that at the very beginning in 2014, if you wanted to participate in this way, in this medicine, you had to be an entrepreneur, right? You had to go out and build a practice. But the cool thing about today is that there are actually lots of opportunities, because that first generation of clinics have grown up and are now hiring second and third practitioners to build their capacity. So if you just want to be a healer, there's opportunities for you to be a healer and make a couple $100,000 a year working at someone else's clinic if you've built those skills. And I think that is actually enticing to a lot of practitioners. And I think that if you look 5 years down the road, I think that most doctors doing functional medicine are employed and not entrepreneurs, which is a shift from today, right? Where we've seen. And so you've seen the huge growth in the practices building that second and third practitioner. But I would also say that that has been a struggle. If you look out in the industry, there's not that many percentage of clinics that have got to that second and third practitioner because of exactly what you just shared, right? There are There are lessons that need to be learned that can't be learned from this industry because it hasn't happened yet, or it hasn't happened at reasonable scale. You have to go to other places to learn. And one of the reasons why I'm excited about, this podcast and being part of this movement is that I think we're at an inflection point right now where if you want to be relevant and you want your practice to be relevant in 10 years time, you need to, one, double down on the things that technology can't do. So building relationships, building community, building connection, being local, being in your practice and being local. And second, really starting to think about the future and plan for the vision that you want. There's going to be all kinds of organizations willing to build successful, well-organized practices. We've already seen the beginning of that, right? We've seen things like Forum Health, where they'll buy 49% of your practice and help you with certain things. I think time will tell whether those kind of models actually work or are, who they benefit. Essentially, does it benefit just the capital? Does it benefit the doctor? Does it benefit the patient? I think the jury's still out on that. But ultimately, there will be more of that. There will be more consolidation, but all good things will come to practices that run a tight ship and ultimately can get themselves in a position where they have a predictable future. They're growing towards it and they have their sales organized. They have their service organized and they're growing in a predictable way.
James, speaking of predictions, I'm gonna ask you to make one. For some time, there's been a movement towards trying to go broad, right? I have a practice and I want to be able to see as many people as I can. And so I'm going to go as broad as possible and figure out how to potentially even not use my license so that I can advertise across the entire country, right? Some practitioners do that. There has been a movement towards creating celebrity even, right, around that. And I know that you've also been pushing for localization and the importance of community. And community can mean a number of different things. But looking out a year from now, I'm not going to ask you to go 5 or 10 years in the future, but a year from now, how important is it to have a strong local foundation versus a very broad national one?
It's an interesting question. Oh, I think the opportunity to go broad will still be there. I think there's certainly new innovation, information or otherwise that will be coming out from our industry. If you look back historically, what you see is that businesses that have grown really, really quickly in our space have been just one little piece of the functional medicine pie. What hasn't grown effectively has been the whole stack, right? The full care delivery, because it's complex and it's complicated to deliver. I don't think that an individual clinician, it's going to be difficult for them to compete with extremely well-funded, extremely well-organized, AI driven startups, right? That's going to be very difficult for them to do because at the end of the day, that the software is going to, outperform, the human brain, sooner rather than later. Where I think the real opportunity lies for the medium term is to focus in on the things that can't be done by AI. And that's why I've been a huge proponent of community all the way through, right? If you can introduce people to each other who want to be healthy, the value that you create through that interaction, is to the people that you introduce, but also comes back to you in terms of reputation and quality. And, I also see we're living in a lonelier world than ever before. And so you can't solve loneliness with AI. I don't think those chatbots, they might do a good job of feeling supportive, but I don't think it's affecting your loneliness. And loneliness is a key driver, the biggest driver of all cause mortality, more than your environment, more than food, more than alcohol, more than cigarettes, right? So you have these incredibly powerful drivers of health. And ultimately, I feel that like the power move for most practitioners is to become the most valuable and well-organized and consistent local organization and bet on relationship. The one thing that functional medicine built on is the patient-practitioner relationship. That is the thing that drives a lot of the healing. And it's one human to another human. And so I would highly recommend that practitioners, the average practitioner looking to know what to do right now, is I would double down on the things that technology can't, because you can all see AI, and the first time you play with it, you're like, is this magic? I don't even know how this is happening, but what's happening? But we can see that we've never seen anything like it before. And quite how that's going to turn into medicine, we don't really know. But what we do know is that we can focus on the things that are uniquely human. And if we do that, we will definitely be successful in a year's time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, who knows? But I think that there are elements to the human experience that are critical for healing and health creation. And I think that doubling down on relationships and community is your best tool. And ultimately, with the rise of everything else, I think there's an unlimited opportunity in almost every zip code to be that practitioner.
It's really well said, James. And if technology replaces our relationships and our community, then we have a much bigger issue than how do we run a medical practice, right? So I think that's a really well thought out and well said prediction for the future that gives people hope and an idea that we can still thrive in whatever technology comes out, right? And that's been the case for years and years and decades. There's always been a set of technological changes or economic changes, and practices have found their way through that, and they found a way to thrive and even improve the lives of their patients and improve the lives of the owner of the business and their team members. And I think this is really no different. It's in a different wrapper and a different version of that, but leaning into relationships, leaning into community, and leaning into the structure and operation of your business so that it is sound, allows you to catch that wave fully. So that was very well said, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. James, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I feel that this is a new phase, right? This is a new phase for our industry. And while previously, if you look at the things that were important in the last phase, it was about learning how to get consistent outcomes. It was about building the internal confidence and fortitude to be able to know that this is the right way to take care of chronic disease, right? That salutogenesis is the best way to do it, and that we need to work out how to be healthy. I think we're moving into a post sick care environment, and a lot of people are going to, want to know what to do. And I think another way that practitioners can move the needle is to develop relationships with all of the salutogenic practitioners and salutogenic businesses in their community. Just a few weeks ago, we did an event called Healthy El Dorado, and built around one functional medicine practice, which is two pediatricians with incredible outcomes and taking their work seriously and getting organized. We had over 50 vendors. So fitness facilities and farms and food delivery organizations and education organizations and mainly and then obviously like chiropractors and acupuncturists and saunas and fitness centers and all these kind of things. Ultimately, I think that the best thing that you could do as a practitioner is to build relationships with the whole salutogenic environment. And I think that there are ways that we're going to see in the next little while having those relationships can be valuable. And, that is the sort of the nervous system that we spoke about earlier, making it into the edges and making it into the farthest parts of the body. And I think that those organizations that build salutogenic networks in their community are best positioned to win.
I love that. James, thank you. Listeners, if you'd like more information like this, please follow along and subscribe to the Freedom RX podcast. I'm your host, Seth Conger. I've been with my guest and our executive producer, James Maskell, today for this incredibly enlightening and future predicting conversation. James, I love these conversations that we have So thank you for your time today. And thank you all listeners for participating with us. More to come.